Today's talk for you guys, we have a talk called Federated and Free. I'm going to be talking about distributed and decentralized application architectures. I don't go into too many specifics as far as how you need to write your code from step A to step B and C and onwards. Because I don't know what back-end technology you're working on. I don't know what kind of platform, but I'm going to talk about standards, open standards that you should be using if you are building a federated system. And you don't have to use open standards, but if you want things to be interoperable and truly federated, working with open standards is the right way to go. And so hopefully we'll dive into what's available now standards-wise for federated applications, see what some of the stumbling blocks are for development at this point in history, and kind of a roadmap of where you might expect to see things going in the future. So let me get started here. The URLs for this talk, I have two URLs up here. They both go to the exact same set of slides. There's a bit.ly URL, which is super short, if you like the short URLs. I find these so cute URLs to be much easier on my brain to remember. So socuteurl.com/cherrycupcakes. That'll sink right into my memory, and hopefully you guys will be able to retrieve this later if it's useful to you anyway. So I'm Ryan, or Ryan J. You could find me as Ryan J on GitHub, Twitter, IRC. Any of those places, feel free to look me up and ask me questions about any of this stuff. And my day job, I work at Red Hat. Awesome company who does open source, pretty much only open source, and that's all they do. That's one of the reasons I was interested in working there. But yeah, I work on their Openshift project, and so we have a platform as a service. I might touch on that way at the end of the talk. Because it kind of relates to building open systems. So one thing the cloud has taught me, and I've learned many lessons from the cloud, but one big thing the cloud has taught me is to plan for failure, right? If you are an engineer or a DevOps person and you're working with Amazon instances, this is something Amazon will tell you. They don't even expect reliability necessarily out of their own platform, right? They'll tell you plan for failure, plan for small pieces failing, and plan to be able to reroute around those. And if your architecture takes that into assumption as a fundamental way of how you operate, you're going to gain a lot from planning for failure and planning how to route around it. How has failure specifically impacted me as a developer? I can see my EC2 instances sometimes go and disappear, right? That's kind of expected. But also as a user, you might want to plan for failure. I know Google recently, there was a big splash in the press around Google Reader suddenly being end-of-lifed and retired, right? And people were like, hey, where do I go? I think I have a Google Reader somewhere, and it's probably been buffering up news content for years, and I probably haven't looked at it, but now I'm angry, and now I'm inspired to go find my own open solution where I will never be locked out of my news feeds and my content, right? So this is a graphic image. This is the only one in the series. I have a couple photos in here, and they're all Star Wars themed except for this one. So sorry to throw you guys off a little bit, but I really like the imagery here. This is, I think, like the 4th or 5th episode of the original Star Trek series. It's called The Cloud Minders, and they go and visit this wonderful city in the clouds, right? And you can see it off in the distance, like, wow, a cloud city. What's it like to be up there? But from down on the planet where these guys start off at the beginning of the episode, this is often how I feel about my cloud solutions like Google Reader. It's there, it's in the cloud, but it's way the hell over there. And I don't necessarily have direct control over my own content, my own data, my own cloud life, essentially. is kind of inaccessible to me. So we're going to look at Cloud City as a metaphor for where we want to be with federated apps and how we can get there, right? Always think about what's the worst that can happen. Plan for failure, right? Okay, so let's get to it. Welcome to Cloud City. So who owns your data in Cloud City? Here's a hint for you guys. Read the terms of service. It may not be you. You may not be who owns your data as far as the terms of service are concerned. And that's because, hey, when they're running the platform, they really get to dictate what the terms are, right? So some of this is user advocacy as well as developer standards that you can use to help kind of ride this wave, I think. One thing to take careful notice of whenever you're dealing with a cloud-based solution, Google Reader, Facebook, Google Plus, right? Any of these, can you export your data in an open format? Here's a screenshot I just got from my Google Accounts page just a couple minutes ago. Hopefully that's a decent sized font where you guys can read it there. But it looks like they have 14 services that currently are participating within their data export program. And yes, indeed, with Google, they are one of the better companies as far as allowing you to walk away from their Cloud City, right? If you wanted to pack up and leave and move to a new town, Google kind of has some safeguards to allow you to export your data, which is pretty important. I know one thing I heard of in the past with Facebook, they have all these different privacy settings, and I heard a couple reports of people who had said, all right, Facebook, I do not want you to collect this whole category of content about me. Don't collect it, don't store it, just don't, you guys are not allowed to do this with my data, right? But then when they went to Facebook's export program and they exported their data, they found that Facebook was continuing to track all of this data. They were just setting the visibility flag to false, right? So you got to watch out for, you know, what you have in the cloud is often dictated by someone else's terms of service. You rarely have any negotiation or recourse or you know, way to bargain with them. Terms are subject to change at any moment. You can be banned without warning for all kinds of crazy reasons. And often what happens in Cloud City currently kind of gets stuck in Cloud City. They don't really allow you to say, this is data that you're not allowed to keep on me, or information that I don't like stored about myself. So one thing I did when looking at this whole problem was I took a big step back from the cloud and thought, how can I really get to the root of this? Part of it is related to identity. So I have a couple slides just on identity here, and then we'll move to data formats and other things. But who brokers your identity? I like to have more of a back and forth with people. If you guys have suggestions, yell them out. Oh shit, that's a lot of, sorry, excuse me. Just meant to hit down once. Here. All right, so your email provider. Your email provider may be one person that brokers your identity in a way. A lot of OAuth or other protocols may resolve down to email as their fundamental unit of identity for you, right? Not everyone uses email as the fundamental identifier, but that's often, you know, email and as well as your email provider kind of taking a piece of that. Your phone company may be brokering your identity to some extent. AT&T is probably going to know that you have an iPhone. They're probably going to know which apps you have installed. They're going to know which businesses you're dealing with on the Apple Store, because they're going to be looking at essentially all of your data as it goes over the wire. And they're going to be looking at your cell phone bill if you have your iTunes, you know, billing to your cell phone bill or something like that. Credit agencies may be someone who delves in identity and identity kind of keeping profiles on people. That may not be one that you're confronted with every day, but they're definitely keeping an identity profile on you. Your social security number can be identity. Google and Apple, you know, I would say probably everyone here Raise your hand if you don't have an Android or Apple phone. Is there anyone? I'm going to single someone out as a BlackBerry user, huh? Sorry, BlackBerry user, you can go back to hiding. No, it's everyone, right? If you're on Google or Apple, these guys basically have an identity profile for you, and they essentially have your primary communication device rooted, right? I'm wearing my tinfoil hat NSA shirt here. So part of this is brought on by my, like, what can I do as a user? What do I try to move to? And what technology companies do I want to support based on what open standards that the companies are supporting, right? I want to advocate as a consumer and support good standards. Some of these guys, Facebook, LinkedIn, they may house a lot of your data, but you may not be considered their customer, right? So Facebook and LinkedIn primarily, they collect a lot of data on you in order to sell information, statistics, other analytics to marketing companies, right? So you're not even the core consumer there, and that's part of why you have so little bargaining room when it comes to terms of service. The terms of service aren't even for you. They're there to harvest information from you and then essentially sell it to marketing teams, right? So be careful about who you're dealing with as far as an identity provider on the web, on the open web, right? GitHub is my favorite out of these. I do log in with GitHub, whenever I can, and I feel good about GitHub for a couple reasons. One is that they are a company that supports open source. That, for me, is awesome. Two, they have a revenue model. They're not an open source company that is necessarily just going to collapse in 2 or 3 years when their developers get tired of working for free year after year after year. GitHub, I think, will be around. I think they can guarantee uptime. They have a good, well-aligned interests with me as someone who would want to use them as an identity provider, and they support a social good. So they're my favorite out of this identity list. But with changing terms of service, you may start off with one company like Instagram that you love, and then next moment they get bought by Facebook, and all of a sudden all your data is now owned, all your base belong to Facebook at that point. So yeah, you got to be careful. You want to be able to export your data. One topic I like to bring up related to identity is something called NIM rights. One of my friends from the Bay Area, Aesthetics on Twitter, AESTITX, Aesthetics, I don't know. Anyway, this guy runs nimrights.org, and they have a whole kind of focus on anti-discrimination, preserving your right to privacy, and a couple other fundamental ideals. And these guys are basically trying to set up an environment where using pseudonyms is fully acceptable. You can see in Germany, there's something called the German Telemedia Act, right? And they actually put into legislation that in order to protect our citizens' privacy, businesses are required to allow you to log in under a pseudonym, right? And this is for the public interest, right? Look it up. German Telemedia Act basically supports anonymity and privacy safeguards by allowing you to log in under a pseudonym. If you look at the converse and what's happening in the United States, we have things like the Real ID Act. We have, Facebook is basically banning accounts that they do not, if they don't believe you're a real person, they can ban you because they don't believe you're a real person. Whether or not you are a real person in the real world doesn't matter to their fraud team. If you show up on a metric as not being a real person according to their statistics, you can get ejected from Facebook. And I used to work at a company called Second Life. We have this huge virtual world, right? Millions and millions of online virtual people, and we spent a lot of time and energy developing this really sophisticated Facebook Connect integration, right? And we were going to allow all these virtual people to share their lives online with the Facebook world, and there'd be this great interchange of ideas and information. And you know what happened? Just after we finished with this integration, Facebook says, wow, we just found about 100,000 accounts that all don't appear to be real people. Why don't we bulk ban this whole community? And the whole community at once all got up and ejected from Facebook. I've often seen people from Google Plus early days was really focused around real ID, real identity, maybe by using your bank account as supplemental information, or other means to look up secondary identifiers and get it down to a real ID as far as who they're dealing with. And I can understand there's clear reasons for doing this as far as fighting fraud and other things, but there needs to be a good balance between the public interests, privacy needs, and what platforms we decide that we want to use and where we want to store our data. So I talked about the US, as we move our lives online, we lose the ability to negotiate with these businesses often. There's no democratic process to work with. You do have the free market supply and demand to rely on, but really you want to meet your friends where there's a large community. Places like Facebook and Google Plus, honestly, are where the community's at. So there needs to be a viable alternative platform for people to move to. And there has been a couple that have been kind of prototyped. So let's look into what goes into establishing an open protocol for decentralized identity on the web. There's a couple standards in here. OpenID I thought was really promising. Anyone basically, the model behind this is anyone can host their own OpenID server. It basically has a pingback URL that authenticates you as having a homepage on server X or whatever server, right? So I thought this was a great standard. I decided I was going to try to adopt this and use this for all of my own identity. And I was so stoked. I was like, I am going to host my own OpenID server, right? So I tried to do this. I had I'm going to log in with me@myowndomain.com, right? I had it all set up. And then my Comcast internet goes down to my home server, which was hosting my OpenID. All of a sudden, my OpenID pingback is not accessible, and I'm locked out of every account that I'm using OpenID with because my Comcast connection goes down, right? You don't want to be in those kind of situations. You need uptime, reliability. A distributed nature of a system is definitely good, but you really got to get to the real world, focus on uptime as well. OAuth is another good standard. It actually, instead of just a pingback on some URL, it does a little bit more to support like a three-way handshake between a public server and another behind the scenes, and you can get kind of a cryptographically okay, this is indeed so-and-so from X system. OAuth 2 is an iteration on this that has a lot of great extensions. If you do a lot of client-side JavaScript development, they have a fully client-side OAuth 2 authentication. You could do the whole login with GitHub, login with Twitter, fully client-side, all in JavaScript. There are some kind of security concerns around that particular implementation, and I've heard a lot of people talk a lot of smack about OAuth 2, but there's basically one configuration detail. If you guys are out there implementing an OAuth 2 based system as a OAuth provider, I would not recommend it. You want to leave the security or crypto security especially, leave it to the experts whenever possible, because if you're supporting a community of several thousand or millions of people and you screw up the crypto, guess whose fault it is that all their data got leaked, right? You don't want to be that guy. You want to make sure you're refer with some crypto nerds and make sure you get your stuff right. But if you're an OAuth 2 provider, there's one thing for that JavaScript workflow. There's a redirect or referrer URL. All you do is say configure that along with your keys. Don't supply it on the query string. And that one modification, it's an optional part of the spec, choose the right option, and the client side OAuth 2 is pretty solid. A newer standard along these similar lines is Browser ID, which is now called Persona. Browser ID is a emerging standard, still pretty new. We'll take a quick look at it later. It seems like it's mostly championed by the Mozilla Foundation right now. Great team. I hope that this standard gets available in every browser, and it could be really something that we can rely on. But it sounds like they're planning for support for mobile devices and any kind of web-based authentication. If it's browser-based, they can handle it, which is pretty good. That covers most of what you'll be dealing with. The OAuth spec and the OAuth 2 spec has a couple other options for non-browser-based communication. So if browser-based is not the solution for you, maybe take a look at OAuth 2. There's a couple ways to use it without a browser session. I could answer questions about that if we have time at the end. So you mostly, you want to be focusing on open protocols. It's great that all these open protocols are available, but access control is still generally centralized, right? I'm still doing a login with Facebook or a login with Twitter, login with Google, and so potentially every time I do authentication against Facebook, they know who I'm authenticating against, they know whose data I'm dealing with, and they get a lot of kind of metadata about my activity by being my authentication provider. Let's do a quick look at some of the details available in Browser ID. I mentioned it was mostly web-based. It's also resolves down to an email address based on the verified email protocol. There's a focus on privacy, browser integration, like I said, and it provides this great identity bridge technology, which allows you to use existing OpenID and OAuth workflows. So if you are already well down the road to an OAuth style implementation, or you're an OAuth 2 provider, then you can come in and essentially allow support for your existing workflows using Browser ID to navigate those workflows. So definitely something to look into, the identity bridging support. Eventually, it may be because you're a Second Life user, you get banned from Facebook. It may be because you have a funny name that someone doesn't like. But what I like to think about when I get locked out of my data and locked out of my cloud services is not how do I get my data out and what do I do now, because currently I don't have any other choice once I'm locked out. But my better question is, what's our switching cost, right? And this goes around with that kind of planning to fail, right? Plan for failure, plan to be able to ditch your social platform if possible, look for alternatives, and always evaluate your switching cost. So the tech industry's kind of been struggling with this same issue in regard to hardware and infrastructure when it comes to the cloud, right? A lot of companies have been ditching their, we don't own hardware anymore. That's Amazon's problem, right? They're trying to make a separation between switching cost on hardware, and Amazon's a great solution, but they also like having potentially switching between Amazon and Rackspace or something else, right? So the emerging standard for infrastructure as a service here is Openstack. There's a big community around it. If you're building federated systems from the ground up, take a big step back and take a look at your open standard for infrastructure as a service. And ask yourself, who's the customer and do I have control, right? For Amazon EC2, your operations team is really the intended customer there, and they probably have control, but it's a lot of work. They got to do a certain amount of work and take up a certain amount of the responsibilities. Okay, so when I get locked out of my account, this is kind of how I feel about social platforms. I kind of feel like people are locked into, I don't have any other choice. You know, sure, if there was another solution, if there was a anti-Facebook or a anti-Google, maybe I would use it, maybe. But is it going to be support? Is it going to be around? Is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to be reliable? And are you going to be able to take your data and walk away? Not many businesses, big enterprises are like, let's invest heavily on something that people can walk away from. That's rarely their first thought. But on the other hand, you know, you invest in building a solution like that, and maybe you win over consumer confidence, right? So as a consumer, personally, I seek out utilities that specialize in serving my interests as an individual, right? So this is a choice I've made. I'm not trying to push it on you guys, but cell phone contracts. When I buy a cell phone, I buy my hardware separate, and I have my cell phone contract, my monthly uptime for my cell phone connection. I like to keep that separate from my purchase of my hardware. For me, that, you know, cell phone companies like to bundle their hardware with their membership plans. But me, I kind of see that as them trying to get a leap into the banking industry somehow. Like they want you to take out a loan and then pay it down over a monthly plan. And it's kind of a mix of, you know, are they really here to serve me and maintain uptime on my cell phone? Or are they here to really take out loans and serve as a banking interest? Like, what is their primary responsibility, and what type of interaction do I want to have with this company, right? So I try to keep it really tightly scoped as far as what interaction I want to have with my companies. And I feel like hopefully that gives me more control as a consumer to act for, you know, what I'm actually going for. So one thing that you might notice along the same lines, ISPs sometimes, like AT&T, they may say, hey, we have our AT&T Uverse streaming television, and since we control the lines of network communication and we offer the video streaming service, we're going to basically give our own video streaming higher access to bandwidth than Netflix, right? They could start squeezing out competitors because they have essentially a conflict of interest between providing you bandwidth and providing you access to entertaining videos, right? And as a consumer, I feel like I always want to pull those apart, de-encapsulate decouple these solutions and treat them as separate utilities, because I feel like it more effectively addresses my needs and allows me to lobby for, no, you guys are here for uptime. That's what you're here for, you know? You're here to keep the atoms or electrons zipping across those wires or through the tubes, whatever you got. Mitt Romney once said a while back, I like being able to fire people. I like this attitude when it comes to big business. Big business should be developing and adopting standards, enabling communities and ecosystems for all of us to work within, right? That's really, I think, the long-term direction we want the open cloud to be heading. So does your online presence broker recognize you as their customer? You know, we kind of talked about most being information or advertising focused. App.net, how many people have heard of App.net? Yeah, all right. How many people use their App.net accounts? Oh, right? What's that? Ah, yeah, nice. Yeah, I have an App.net account. I've created one. I think okay.
Why is it not listed under contact on your website?
I should have it. I don't know if I have. Do I have? I'll have to update that. I'll have to update it. We need to support the emerging platforms, right? But it's a kind of chicken and egg of, do you have a large enough community? Is it worth my time to go post a lot of content to app.net right? It's tough, right? So I like app.net for the following reasons, right? And some people have described it as the open version of Twitter, right? The incentives are aligned, right? This is a couple of the things, like, is the uptime going to be there? Is there reliability? Are the incentives well aligned? Here, I am the customer, not the advertising agencies, right? So a correct alignment between a company that wants to provide uptime, right? and me as a content producer who wants to get my message out, right? I think that's a good start, right? Another thing to look at, they have an incentive for, okay, that's what I just mentioned. Incentive profit that's well aligned with the interests of their consumers. Whether it's a sustainable solution or not depends on how many consumers they get and how big of an audience they're supporting. So hopefully it remains sustainable. Hopefully there's plenty of developers continuing to work on app.net. Also, app.net kind of makes an immediate assumption right off the top. They automatically kind of assume advertising is not a valid form of supporting their platform, right? This could be something that, I don't know if that's a safe assumption to make. I think that maybe if people don't want to pay the $10 per month or whatever you got, $10 a year, I don't know. But opt-in support for advertising, especially in a completely anonymized way, is that the right word? You know what I mean. Or even saying, I'm actually fine with personalized ads based on this limited set of data, right? Like, I think that's actually a fine way of doing business, but it ought to be a configuration feature, and the incentives need to be well aligned around supporting the consumer. Also, this is my big deal with app.net. Can I host my own? Is there lock-in? Maybe I don't want to host my own, but just telling me that I can, that automatically wins me over like 90% of the time. Like, whether I'm going to do it, right? I don't want to be the ops team. I don't want to be responsible for guaranteeing the uptime, but I want to know that I can outsource that task to someone else who can be responsible purely for uptime, right? So that's one of my concerns with app.net. And if there's no way, I know they have a data export, which is good. Twitter has a data export now. Facebook has something, but like I said, like they had it for a while and then they took it down because it was obvious that they were collecting data they weren't supposed to, and maybe it's back up now. I need to figure out the latest status of the export your data from Facebook initiative. But in any of these, you may end up with a walled garden or a place that maybe doesn't get the size of the market that it'll need to really reach a critical mass and a critical success. And then even then, if it does reach that success that you're looking for, will it become another one of these too big to fail, like Google all of a sudden taking away your Google Reader? As they become bigger, they become harder to manage. So or harder to deal with as a consumer. So you want open systems, configurable, plan for failure, plan to rebuild it, plan for an open platform. And in this situation, the platform and the product are still tightly coupled. You're not able to re-implement app.net, as far as I know, on your own hardware. And maybe you wouldn't need to or want to, but things to think about as far as portability and building federated systems. So identity managers have incredible control over their platforms. I think identity and platform need to be decoupled. We need, of course, some kind of open platforms to work on, and open systems all the way down. So let's see, here's my big starting over from scratch with an open cloud. Here's how I would build it, right? Solution needs to be open, needs to be secure, needs to be properly monetized, have the right incentives for consumers, no lock-in, hopefully, minimal switching costs, and reality check, we need to ensure uptime, right? And decouple platform and product, and have things really aligned around paying for service uptime, and supporting interoperability and portability of applications and data. So how do I get these done? What components do I use? Openshift Online is one solution. I work for Red Hat. We have a hosted platform. You can build out as many federated apps as you like there. You can host 3 for free, which I'm not trying to sell this to like you guys, but if you guys are building federated apps and you expect people to spin up instances on demand and join your federated architecture, this could be a way for you to scale. Basically tell people to sign up for a free Openshift account. They could host 3 apps on Openshift. We're aligned around guaranteeing the uptime, and there's no expiration on those 3 apps for free. So this is one tool that you could use. If you like it, great, use it. If not, the whole thing is open source, so you could run your own Openshift. At any point, you could take it up and walk away and say, I'm taking all my data with me, I'm taking my whole platform with me, and I'm gonna run your software for free in my own data center, and that's totally an option. That's how we built it from the start, right? So, you don't like Red Hat for some reason, getupcloud.com is a site that has basically, they've taken Openshift and they're running their own Openshift in Amazon, and their market they're trying to reach is Brazil. So they have the whole site translated into Portuguese, but you could sign up and do, your own Openshift hosting. They're doing their own Openshift hosting and making money at it, right? There's nothing in our terms that says you can't use this as a platform and make money with it as well. It's all Apache 2 licensed. So I think long term, you may see a lot of major infrastructure as a service companies like Rackspace or other vendors, bundling Openshift and kind of upping their game for, we're not just giving you open source whole instances using Openstack or another open standard, but we're going to help manage those services since now the code's already been written. Code's available, readily available for anyone to use. Open sourcing the cloud. OS, check. I think OSs have been, at least on the Linux, if you're running Apple, I've got Apple hardware right here. But I can tell you I'm running Linux on it. So you at least have the choice to liberate your OS and your server OS, right? So next step up from that, infrastructure, check, liberated. We've got Openstack. Red Hat has an upstream version of Openstack packaged up called RDO. If you wanted to work on upstream OpenStack and have that available in your Fedora or Red Hat Linux or whatever other, I guess it's mostly Red Hat Linux style, uses that RDO. Platform, liberated. We've got Openshift. The other big player in that area is Cloud Foundry. That's the other platform as a service that's open source. Pivotal Labs is behind that one. It's another good project to keep an eye on. My favorite, of course, is Openshift. So let's see. Yeah, and if you're using something like Openshift, you can integrate with OpenStack or other open systems to manage your existing identity, authentication, and authorization services. So OpenStack has something called Keystone, which is a authentication API for basically integrating with your Microsoft identity system. I forget what they call it. What's that? Active Directory, yeah. We can, Keystone can integrate with Active Directory, Kerberos, PAM modules, LDAP, all these different things, and Openshift can integrate with those as well if you're running this in-house and you already have your own identity management solution. Or you could use a platform as a service like Openshift or what have you to run your own OpenID, your own OAuth provider, your own, you could host your own identity network with using these type of tools. So in the end, I think, cloud should be a free market for online services. And, I'm seeing a lot of specialization specifically on, identity plus storage or identity plus compute, identity plus caching, right? All these things are basically being, the solutions and the companies behind them are a lot of them re-architecting to build around something that is compatible with federated application design. Whether they realize it or not, the industry is moving in this direction. One thing that I'd love to see, this is my prediction, I haven't seen it, actually a couple people I've heard have predicted this, domain registries that allow you to register a domain with a OAuth style login process, right? So go to GoDaddy, log in with my GitHub account, and pick up a domain using Bitcoins, right? No one allows you to do, register a domain now without real identity and a credit card on file because they want to make damn sure who they know, like who you are, right? But that would be a real, we're moving in the right direction if we see something like that. So back in Cloud City, here's my future Cloud City. It's a lot closer now. There's a lot more structures. It's not just one little castle on one little cloud out of reach. Here we're kind of living amongst the clouds. Here's some solutions that you can use today, right? How many people have used, actually, can I get a quick show of hands? I asked this and I've gotten mixed results, but is it diaspora or diaspora or neither? Diaspora? No? And 50% for diaspora? No? Diaspora won this time around. All right. So diaspora, decentralized social. Sounds like pretty much everyone's heard of it. Hopefully you guys understand the technology behind it. It's a multi-home pub-sub kind of model. There's multiple kind of hubs, diaspora hubs, that can have multiple users there. And that's where the content stays, is centralized within these hubs. And then hubs can pub and sub across each other. And each hub essentially just houses the data from whichever user is registered to that hub. But you could follow users from other hubs and get notifications that content has arrived on another hub, essentially. There's a foundation that supports it. Good move for being around for a long time and being sustainable, hopefully. You could sign up at joindiaspora.com. They've got great kind of demo sites up and running, easy to sign up for, easy to join, but it has the same problem to me that app.net has. Does it have the community? Does it have the critical mass? It's potentially one of the best open, fully kind of fleshed out platforms that I think are an alternative to Facebook or Google+. But it doesn't really have the critical mass. Has a focus on privacy, freedom, and users owning their own data and interoperability among these diaspora sites, right? So your content from one, you can probably export, pick up, and import onto another diaspora node. Diaspora, what they didn't do was come out with a standard for their data. I know you can move things from diaspora node to other diaspora nodes because they're like systems, but do they have a consistent data format where a non-diaspora site could then do a federated pub sub with a diaspora site, right? How far does the federation go really depends not just on the platform and on the particular app technology, but has it adopted an open protocol for communicating at a fundamental level? And so let's see. Let's take a look at what that would look like, standards for communication. You want to decouple identity and data or activity, right? You want to interact with folks across social hubs or across other application hubs, nodes, essentially. Open Social made an effort at making a public standard for this, but then they went from an open standard to a closed source proprietary standard. So it's not something I would recommend nowadays, but for historical reasons, I mentioned Open Social. Tent.io, how many people have heard of Tent? Yeah, they have actually an amazing set of GitHub issues. If you go to their issue tracker on GitHub, they had a full-blown debate on all of these topics as far as, which standards do we want to adopt? What's the right type of data format to use? The GitHub issues list for Tent.io is really, really cool. I was reading it every day, wow, this is, they basically came to an agreement that with these pub sub networks, anytime you wanted to push data, it had to be a HTTP post, right? So they went way into the REST spec and decided they wanted to get on board with that. But not everyone has stuck with, such low-level requirements for their specifications. Pump.io is another solution. Tent is Ruby-based. Pump.io is Node.js based. Pump, they went super raw and they just said, hey, look, in typical Node.js style. They said, hey, everything just needs to be a stream. That's it. End of conversation. Make it a stream. We're done, right? So Pump.io is basically activity streams with Socket.io or something equivalent, and then they went and made a nice UI for it, right? So Pump.io is pretty good. Check it out. I got a link here to the Pump.io GitHub page, but all this stuff that I'm listing here is on GitHub or an open standard. OwnCloud is another one. How many of you guys have heard of OwnCloud? Cool. OwnCloud is awesome. It's like Dropbox. You can basically create an OwnCloud deployment. You can upload your files there, and then you could pick a particular file or a collection of files. You could share it to one person or create a shareable link that goes out to however many people, regardless of authentication. Very similar to what you might expect from like Google Drive or Dropbox, but you can host your own. So that's particularly cool. We have our own cloud on Openshift. That is possible. So let me go really quick. I have own cloud. I spun this up yesterday. This is my own cloud, my own cloud running on Openshift. And so this is one of our potentially kind of federated-y apps, right? They have a section in here for applications. So it's not just files. You could see files, music, contacts, calendar, pictures. But then they also have, whoops, I don't know where that. So they also have this whole thing of apps where you could basically have things that run on top of OwnCloud, which I think is written in PHP if I remember correctly. So OwnCloud, really cool thing to keep an eye on. And my favorite of all of these, Tahoe LAFS. How many people have heard of that one? That's the weirdest. Oh man, all right. Okay, a couple nerds get some bonus points. All right. So Tahoe LAFS is basically, it's kind of like OwnCloud, but it's much more focused around cryptography. When they store your data, it's stored cryptographically secure in a way where the system administrators do not even have access to read your data. Like your data is stored in a fully encrypted format without any keys on how to read it. And so there's no longer a conflict of interest between, is my data warehouser going to be doing, are they really aligned around holding my data and storing my data, or do they have a secret ulterior motive of reading through my data, saying that they'll store it for free, but their real market is actually advertisers, and they're going to crawl through all my data and then sell statistics? Like, I don't think that this is realistic, but my paranoid tinfoil hat brain has to think of this as a potential option, and that's why I love Tahoe LAFS. LAFS stands for Least Authority File System. So we'll take a quick look at Tahoe in a minute. Here's kind of a big overview of some of the architecture. This is an old slide from a Tent.io diagram. And so I would flip this upside down. It looks upside down to me, but the data's flowing up in this, right? So you're starting off as a user at the bottom. You have status messages, photos, profile changes. You submit those to your Tent server via a post request from your browser to your local Tent node. And then it's going to keep track of how many subscribers are out there. And let's say you have 5 friends that are a subscriber to your Tent data. They would then all get notified that new content has arrived. They'd pull down either a copy of the content or a reference back to your server, and they'll notify the friends, right? And so for Tent.io and especially Pump.io, they're starting to make these systems real time. So as people are acting and posting, real-time updates are streaming into your feed. Really cool stuff from those guys. Okay, here's a couple kind of network diagrams here of kind of hard to read there, but the first one you could see is all the roads go to Rome, right? All one central, easy for someone to potentially spy on a network when everything's all going through one central, easy to spy location, right? You go out to a decentralized network, you're going to have multiple hubs that then, funnel data back and forth. And then the furthest to the right is fully distributed. And there's, really a mesh network with multiple homes and much less concern for people who are worried about wiretaps or other potential abuses of that type. So open data formats, important standards and projects to keep an eye on. RSS3 is new, evolving. It's one thing that you could use as a data exchange format, and then you could build systems that are compatible with other federated systems, as long as that other federated system is also using an open standard for their data, like RSS3, right? So that's one tool you might want to use. Activity Streams 3 is also a new standard competing with RSS3 that you could use to build out a federated system. GNU Social is another one to keep an eye on. That one's kind of newer and doesn't have as much of a community around it yet, but really interesting things happening there. And so, in the end, the solution's going to need to be, and are we there yet? I'm not convinced that we are, right? I think we still have more standards to implement before you'll see full-blown, massive, federated systems gain mass adoption. But it's going to need to be open, secure, reliable, right? Standards-based, properly monetized, a good, proper alignment of incentives. As far as supporting the consumers. It's going to need to be distributed, decentralized, scalable, and fault tolerant, built to fail, built to allow you to export your stuff and walk away, no lock-in, minimal switching cost. This is one screenshot of I was hoping all these pieces would finally have come together by the time I did this talk, but this is what I did when I tried to use OwnCloud with the very latest and greatest identity management. And there's, in the description here, it says, this doesn't work with encryption since you need a password to decrypt your encrypted data. And Mozilla Persona does a one-click like login with GitHub, there is no password. So they're like, oh, we can't cryptographically do this because you're using an identity standard that bypasses the whole password step, and we rely on that currently. So there still is some more work that needs to be done as far as getting these standards adopted, getting federated applications to then adapt to these standards and support the standards. And everyone's going to need to learn how to work with, hopefully, an open data standard as their fundamental kind of transport for shuffling and synchronizing data. So I'll talk very briefly about cryptography because I'm wearing my NSA shirt, and I already have proclaimed my invisible tinfoil hat here. But these are things that, to me, give me a lot of assurance as a consumer, right? If I know that I can trust the company I'm dealing with, then I am much more comfortable and I have less worries of my own. So here's a couple things that help me trust the company I'm doing business with, because I haven't felt very trustful recently. So you could do full disk encryption, right? You could do file encryption. You can encrypt your network traffic. There's always questions of who owns the lines of transmission, and are those transmissions lines compromised? I know, what was it, LavaBit? Was that the one, the email that shut down? They were getting basically pressured to release their secret key to the FBI so that all data could be basically hijacked. That's why I like the fully decentralized network model, is because not all the data is running down this one channel, right? you have more assurance that that of your own right to privacy, I think. So Tahoe LAFS, let's look at how they did this. These two quotes, this is straight from their public issue tracker page using Track, an open source solution, right? So they said the service provider never has the ability to read or modify your data in the first place. Never. It's not even part of how Tahoe is built. So it's all stored fully cryptographic on disk and over the network. Not only is it easy and inexpensive for the service provider to maintain the security of your data, but in fact, they couldn't violate its security if they tried. That's a service provider I can trust right there, right? They don't even have the capability to read your data, right? No issues of conflict of interest of, are they doing analytics and generating reports for a marketing agency? Not even a question here. So I think that's pretty incredible. And the last encryption detail I'd like to bring up, just as a oddball curiosity, something I've been researching and trying to learn more about, there's a topic called fully homomorphic encryption. And if you can master this, I am sure that you will have a whole community of consumers begging to give you money, because it's something that takes a lot of work to do right. But the idea behind this is it supports blind operations on data. So one example would be, this is a made up fictitious example, but let's say I have a JSON file that stores my bank account balance, right? And it has a, checking $5, savings $100, right? Or maybe more than that, but you get the idea, right? So you have your JSON file and you encrypt it, right? You don't want anyone to know what's in your bank account, but you have someone else who's authorized to deposit $5 along with your existing $5 and double the size of your checking, right? So you basically cryptographically sign, your bank account, you send the data over, and what they can do with fully homomorphic encryption is they can have a separate set of cryptographic keys that allows them to modify the data while encrypted without giving them any visibility into what's inside that file. So they can essentially increment your checking has $5. They could bump it up to 10. They have some operation that's add 10, right? I don't know how it works, but they can operate on your data without ever seeing the actual data itself. And then what they hand you back is a cryptographically signed result that only you can decrypt, right? So this is a particularly interesting, new kind of emerging cryptographic technique that you might want to research just for your own interests. Data stays encrypted the whole time as it's being transacted upon. And there's a nice Wikipedia page about building, fully anonymized internet applications based on this technology. So for building open communities around open infrastructure, OS, and platform, I got a couple links for you. I would say definitely take a look at Openshift Origin. That's our upstream for everything that we do on Openshift. We'd love to have more contributors help liberating the cloud and keeping the cloud platforms open and interoperable. Code for America is a great organization that does kind of civic app development. I have a lot of apps that I've written with Code for America in mind, where a number of communities can then quickly clone and redeploy their own community solution, right? So there's things like, there was a app called Adopt a Hydrant that was made by Code for America. Whoops, hydrantshifter.rhcloud.com. I've got a ton of different solutions that are all easy to clone and redeploy in neighborhoods, and then these neighborhoods can then do pub sub between each other to establish massive civic civic application computing solutions that are federated in nature. So Code for America is a great organization to keep an eye on. I also like keeping an eye on Crypto Party. There's a lot of local events called Crypto Parties. There was one in Oakland last week on Sunday. SF has them every once in a while, and you could learn more about encryption and open source standards and helping learning how to build upon these standards and technologies. So Code for America, really built around these goals: civic app development, community building, hackathons, democracy, all the things I like that are well aligned with my personal goals. And I think to close it out, I'll show you, this is a demo, an app store demo that I did of things you could launch on Openshift. I'm trying to nail out all the federated applications so people can do a one-click. Any of these, if you go to this app, you double-click on any of the entries, and there's a Run on Openshift button. So this is, Etherpad is kind of like my Google Docs, essentially, right? It gives me real-time, collaborative, interactive, multi-person docs that I can spin up and immediately use on whatever open cloud I want, right? There's another solution called Ethersheet that's a multi-user, collaborative, real-time spreadsheet, right? So I've already got Excel and Word ticked off. I'm pretty close to getting like a Paint solution. I want to get the whole Google Docs or MS Office suite all running on an open cloud and available in a single, click here to spin it up. Here's another one. This one is Node.js backend with national parks data. So as I pan this map around, it's got a spatial backend that is drawing all these finding the map points and updating the map. And instead of clone me on GitHub, I have run me on Openshift, and one click, someone could come in, and this is our web-based app creation workflow. But we have in here, it's pulling in the Git URL, or here's the Git repo I'm importing, and I'm using Node.js and PostGIS as my backend dependencies. And I hit one button here, and boom, I'm up and running with a clone of this National Parks mapping app. It's not federated where multiple apps talk to each other, but one step away from having anyone be able to up and clone and distribute their federated applications on an open platform. So I think this is really exciting stuff, and I'll close it up here. Yeah, real-time apps even for the Windows users, anyone on the web. So take back your identity, take back your data. It's your content, define your own TOS, pay for uptime, not for usage terms, decouple, don't bundle, and treat your utilities like utilities. And that's all from me. I'm Ryan. Thanks for hanging in and attending.